there, this is Christine from the Door Doctor, and for today we're going to be making a lovely flower wreath that is great for summer. It's going to have a nice beachy flair to it, and it will be starring, no pun intended, one of these knobby starfish. I have many of these at home that I use in crafts and for decorating. You may have them as well. You can purchase these locally at places like Michael's. I actually source some of my shells from some of the seashell shops that you see along the Cape. I'm up here in Massachusetts, so you'll find different stores that sell starfish. So I thought this would be a good centerpiece for our wreath for today. This particular starfish is about 5 inches from tip to tip, and the center or the middle part of the starfish is about 2 inches, and that should be enough to cover any zip ties in the center of our flower wreath. Okay, so the star of our show, so to speak. So this wreath will be using as a base an 8-inch Dollar Tree wire wreath frame. It's one of my favorites. The finished diameter of a wreath using this with the petals that we're going to be doing today is probably about 20 to 21 inches, depending on how you place your petals and your leaves. I've already applied number 5 mesh to the center. That way you can apply a row of petals to the middle as well. In terms of our mesh, we're going to be using all poly burlap mesh today. The colors are going to be, first off, this turquoise blue poly burlap mesh. It's a 10-inch diameter roll. You'll need, for the blue poly burlap, you'll need about 12 pieces cut into 10 by 10-inch squares. So only about a half a roll for this color. We're also going to be using this turquoise and cream poly burlap windowpane mesh. It's also a 10-inch in diameter roll, and you're going to be using, well, actually the solid turquoise is 15 pieces. This is going to be 12 pieces cut into 10 by 10-inch squares. And then finally, you'll be using a cream colored poly burlap mesh for the final row in the center, and that's about 8 pieces there. And then for the leaves, this is what's marketed as a grass green poly burlap mesh. I think it's really pretty. It has a much brighter tone to it than some of the lime green poly burlap leaves that I use for my flowers. All these poly burlaps, by the way, can be purchased at craftoutlet.com. Okay, and then, you know, the starfish, I've already attached a little pipe cleaner to the back. Usually what I'll do is I'll glue that on the back using a piece of plastic mesh that I've thread the pipe cleaner through, and then once that's glued on, I'll add a little piece of felt over the plastic mesh to protect the wreath underneath it, but also to give it a little extra sturdiness once the glue dries. Okay. All right, so, oh, and I can't forget, last but not least, my 8-inch zip ties. This is what I use to attach all my petals, all my leaves. You can use pipe cleaners as well if you really prefer, but I think that this gives the durability to the wreath that I can't quite get with pipe cleaners. So I'm going to take a quick break. I've already cut all my mesh, but when we come back, we will do row number 1 of our flower, which is going to be the solid poly burlap squares. So get 15 of those ready, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so welcome back. We're going to start on our outer row of petals, and for this row, I use this second wire circle here, not the outer rim. I usually leave that free. So we're going to have 15 petals rimming this second wire, and you can see that there's 3 cross bars on this wreath frame, and so there's 3 different sections, and each section is going to have 5 different petals. Okay, simple. And so for the petal design, this is a pretty standard daisy petal. You'll see it referred to online as the Dean Michael petal. You know, I've used this in a lot of my wreaths. It's pretty durable, pretty simple to do, and I like the shape it gives. All right, so you're going to take your 10-inch by 10-inch poly burlap square, and you're going to line it in front of you. I usually like to have the finished seam closest to me, And you're going to take one corner. I usually take the lower left-hand corner, this being my left hand on screen here, and I bring it up to meet the opposite upper right-hand corner. And you're just going to make a nice triangle, flatten that out. I like to make sure that all the edges are even and meet one another. And then you're going to gather from one end of the folded side of the triangle to the opposite end of that folded side of the triangle. I usually like to tuck in the first edge that I gather. So I tuck it under and then I gather. There we go. And I usually do 6 gathers. I don't know why 6, it's just my routine. And then you're going to shape that. I like to shape it so that you don't see the raw edge underneath your petal. You just see that nice finished border there. That's going to be petal number 1. I'm just going to zip tie that to that second wire. All right. And then I usually work counterclockwise. That way, with each subsequent petal, you're going to be placing it here with this nice finished seam, and that's going to hide the side of the petal that has the raw edge of the poly burlap mesh. So we'll take our second square, take the lower left-hand corner, match it to the upper right-hand corner, flatten out your triangle, and then gather from one end to the other. Fold that under. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we're just going to shape that a little bit. And it has sort of this coved shape to it, sort of curves downward. I think it's really pretty. Get my zip tie under there, almost forgot that. Can't forget my zip ties. All right, number 2. Let me just do a couple more to show you. So number 3. And tuck this under and then gather. And then sometimes I like to do it over again because I do like my edges to line up. Maybe a little compulsive about that. I shouldn't be, but I like it when it's perfectly tucked in. There you go. Maybe we'll just do one more together. So I'll do 4 here. All right, so lower left-hand corner, meet the upper right-hand corner, flatten out your folded edge, make sure everything lines up the way you like it, then fold this under and gather. And give it a little shape. And down it goes. All right, so again, we're going to do 5 petals per section on this wreath, a total of 15 around. I'll take a quick break to finish row number 1, and then we'll come back and do row number 2. All right, welcome back. So I finished row 1 with my turquoise blue petals. I did 15 of those petals, and I'm already on to row number 2. And originally, I was going to show you this from the very beginning, but as I was filming the first 4 petals being applied, my husband walked in and the dog started barking, and so I had to cut. And so instead of removing all these petals and starting again, I just reshot with the 4 petals in place. So, but I'll explain what I did here. So I obviously started placing my window pane mesh petals, and as you can see, I typically like to place them in quadrants to begin with so that everything is fairly balanced, you know, with the second row and the third row and so on. And so usually I place them, you know, across from each other with the second row starting right where the plastic mesh begins. So hopefully you can see that. So I've done one here, just that first complete row of squares. And you know, I've started with 4, so I do sort of north, south, east, and west, and then I fill in the spaces in between. And for this wreath, there's enough room here that you put 2 more petals in between in these gaps. And so we'll do those together. So let me get my zip tie in. Yep, husband's interrupting the action. It's one of the perils of remote work that I'm sure many of you out there are now well aware of. All right, so same petal technique as the solid turquoise blue ones. So you're gonna make your triangle, fold it nice, even sides, and then gather from one end to the next. A little bit harder with the window pane mesh, you know, to make those little gathers, those little pleats. All right, zip tie that on. And I should say that with my poly burlap mesh, all of this has been cut with a wood burner. My wood burner I get on Amazon, comes in a kit with multiple different tips. I think it cost about $25 or so. Pretty durable. I've had mine for a couple of years without much problem. So, and of course, when you cut poly burlap mesh with a wood burner, you should always use a mask, because there's a lot of disgusting smoke, plasticky smoke. All right, so now we're going to go on to this next quadrant, another 2 petals in there. And so again, a total number of 12 petals for this row. There we go, nice triangle. Gather that along the folded edge. The other thing I like to do with my poly burlap squares, once I've cut them, and I think other crafters do this as well, is I like to add a little dot of Mod Podge along my cut edges. So I take a little tiny paintbrush and I just, you know, I don't usually do it on the window pane mesh, but I just dot it right along the edge there. Let it dry. It's an extra step. It takes time. You have to let all your mesh dry. You don't want to be too goopy about it either, so that you don't have big pieces of glue drying on your pretty flower, but I think it just improves the durability of the flower. There's also a Mod Podge spray, which I myself have not used for that purpose, but I think I might. I mean, if anybody wants to leave me a comment if you've used the Mod Podge spray, I'd be interested in knowing if it's, you know, perfectly clear. Does it leave the petals goopy? Anything like that, but anything to save time, right? I can say that painting all the tips of the cut edges is time consuming. All right, so we so far have about, you know, 3/4 of this row filled in. So I'm gonna take a break to finish, and then the third row is gonna be our solid cream. So we'll be right back. All right, so now we're back for row 3, and as you can see, I've already applied 4 of my petals. And this time it was not because my husband interrupted, but it just didn't seem like such a bad idea to start 4 and then talk you through it a little bit. So apologies to my husband. He's not at fault this time. So for row number 3, it's going to be cream-colored solid poly burlap mesh petals. Same style petal as the previous 2 rows. In terms of placement, you're going to just walk in, looks like 5 little squares from the previous row. So this is the previous row right along the edge here. It's probably about an inch in. And this is going to start getting tight. As you can see, there's not much more space left in the center of the wreath. But that'll work to our advantage because you'll manage to cover most of the zip ties with your center, and you're not going to see any gaps. So again, this row, about 1 inch in from the second, you're going to use 8 petals total. I started with my first 4 in my usual north, south, east, west configuration, and now I'm just going to fill in the blank with 4 more petals. All right. I'm sure you all have the hang of this now. So we will move a little bit faster. And then for the flower center, we're not just going to plunk the starfish right in the center. We're going to make a little daisy petal, almost like a cup-shaped daisy petal that will hopefully serve as a nice frame for the starfish. We'll use the window pane mesh for that. So, and for that center row of window pane mesh, you'll just need an additional 4 pieces of your 10 by 10 inch poly burlap mesh. All right. And just working counterclockwise. Just make sure you tuck. If you do this quadrant method I have, you just have to remember to tuck the raw edges of some of your petals underneath the finished edges of the petal adjacent to it. All right, so now we've got number 7. I love seashells on the center of wreaths. I especially with this blue color, it just reminds me of the ocean. You could do this with, you know, I have smaller starfish, but I also have almost like clam shells, these very white clam shells that are pretty easy to attach to wreaths. You could do that. I love the knobby starfish though. All right. And last but not least, all right, just shape that a little bit. All right, number 8. Not much room left, but you'll see. We're going to fill this remaining space a little bit more poly burlap, and then it'll serve as a nice frame for our starfish. Let me just cut my zip ties here. All right, great. So I'm going to place the wreath out of the way for a second so that we can bring our window pane mesh back into the picture here. All right, so 4 pieces, and we're going to, there'll be just enough space to plant them in the middle of the wreath here. They'll overlap a little bit, and the type of daisy petal I'm going to use here is one that I used in one of my other recent tutorials. It's a farmhouse wreath that had cream petals, if you've seen that one before. But to make it, you're going to take your 10-inch poly burlap mesh square, you're going to fold it into a triangle just like we've been doing, and then instead of gathering across the folded edge over here, you're going to start gathering from about the halfway point between the point of the triangle and the base. So you're just going to gather from one side to the next, and it should look like that. And then you're going to hold that middle piece together and bring your sides in. So you're going to swoop in this one side and grab it, and then swoop the other side in and grab it. They always remind me of little wings. So you're going to bring the 2 wings from one side to the other into the middle. And you're going to pinch it, and then I like to shape it almost like a little cup. It's hard to show that. And then you'll zip tie that together. All right. And then you're going to cut any of this extra off from below your zip tie. All right. It should leave you with this little cup-shaped daisy petal. And we're going to do 4 of those. Oops. So again, make your triangle and then gather one side to the next, middle of the triangle. Swoop in the right wing, swoop in the left wing, shape it, then zip tie it. Number 3. I think 4 should do it. I don't think we'll have much more room for 5. Let's see. Number 3. I like to shape it before I completely tighten that zip tie. And then number 4, make your triangle, gather along the halfway point from one side to the next. Grab this right wing, bring it in, left wing, bring it in, shape it, zip tie. All right. All right. And just gonna cut off all my extra poly burlap. And then we will bring our flower back into the frame here. All right, so this will be a little trial and error here, I suspect, because sometimes it gets a little tight. But what we want to do is very tightly place these so that they almost make a little cup, bowl, maybe more of a bowl, more of a bowl shape like that in the middle. And then once they're attached, you're going to thread your starfish into the very middle of that little bowl. We'll see how that works out in actuality though. So let's see. What I think I'm going to do, and I've done this before, is since there's so little room in the very center, in this very center, is sometimes I'll use, and this is where the 8-inch length zip tie comes in handy, is sometimes I'll actually thread it into the same space used already for one of these other petals. That way you can place them a little bit further out from the center. Let me just take a look. Yeah, I think we'll have to do that. So basically what I'll do is I'll put the zip tie in through where this petal is, this petal, the 4 quadrants, north, south, east, and west. So let me see if that'll work. I'll flip it over here. The double zip tie method is going to be my own. I don't know if you could see that very well, but I put the zip tie in the same exact place as this petal here. And so then we'll place our window pane daisy petal over it and attach it, just like that. All right. And so now we'll skip one and we'll do the same thing. Go in and out the same holes pretty much. And we'll give these zip ties a good tug at the end. And then we're going to overlap these daisy petals a little bit too. All right. Skip the next. Let's do this guy. I mean, if you had a larger wreath frame, certainly, and you could also replace your petals so that you leave yourself a little bit more space than I did, but I think this will work well enough. And then finally, number 4. Let's see if I can get that in there. And I'll show you a closer shot of the double zip tie method I just created. Tighten all of these. Don't want those slipping out. All right. And I'm gonna cut these zip ties off so that I'll bring it closer. And you can see this. I didn't want to have these petals much closer than they are because then you won't even get the starfish in there, I don't think so. All right. So I'll bring that a little closer. And you can see the 4 of them, sort of north, south, east, and west. And then when you flip it over, I used the same exact path for the zip ties for those window pane petals as the cream ones. All right, so I think that'll work. And then just to take a peek, yeah, I think our starfish will fit nicely in there. But before we do that, we're gonna take a break. We're gonna do the green leaves and then we'll apply the center at the end. All right, welcome back. And now we're gonna work on the back of the wreath, applying the green leaves. And like I mentioned before, this is a grass green poly burlap mesh. It's already been pre-cut into 10 by 10 inch squares. I've already applied my zip ties to the back of my frame. We're going to place 5 leaves in a star pattern, essentially. So that's the way it looks with the zip ties all arranged really nicely around the wreath. I just sort of space them evenly in a star configuration. And I usually weave them throughout the wire wreath, meaning I'll go under the innermost black row, I go over the next wire, and I go under the outside wire before applying my leaves. And so for the leaf, I've used this on other flowers. It's a little different than this daisy petal in that instead of making a triangle with these 2 points, you're going to actually have the 2 points meet in the middle. So let me move this out of the way so you can see a little bit better. So I actually lie it on my work surface in sort of a diamond configuration with 1 point facing me, the other point facing away, and I take the 2, have them meet in the middle, and then I gather it in the middle. I always think it reminds me of a little bow tie. And I give it a little bend, just a little bend, and then I attach it to my wreath frame. And I usually push it underneath a little bit, if you can see that. Just kind of tuck it underneath the wreath frame so it doesn't move. Let's do the next. So meet in the middle, gather in the middle, give it a little bend. And zip tie it on there. All right, number 3. All right, number 4. And then number 5, coming up next. All right. losing track of my zip tie here. All right, tuck it under a little bit. Make sure I like the spacing there. Give my zip ties a little tug and snip off the ends. And then once you have your center fastened, I usually apply a felt circle to the back of the wreath with zip ties. I'm not going to demonstrate this, but I usually pre-cut a piece of felt that matches the wreath. I have a nice little hole puncher that punches all these nice little teeny tiny holes. And so I'll attach it with the zip ties at the end and then tuck those in back. And then I also use a little pipe cleaner. I usually thread it somewhere to use as a hanger. All right, so back to the front though. For the finishing touch, we will thread our starfish in. I can find my way through the center of the wreath. There we go. It's kind of hiding in there. Let's see. Oh yeah. So probably what I'm going to do is just bend these back a little bit. Less of a bowl, just so we can see. Pretty starfish. I don't want to hide that too much. There. And there you have it. So I think if you have a lot of these little shellfish hanging around the house, they might make a nice flower center that you never even knew you had. So take care, enjoy this wreath, and I'll be back again with more.